how are you receiving the news of the quarantines as it will continue and move on in Metro Manila?
Like I said the last time we spoke, in my view, it's not as important what the name of the quarantine level is at this time because the quarantine itself is changing. We want a slow, gradual opening, especially in light of the last few days, whereas Professor Guido is going to point out, there's been a reversal in the trend of decreasing for the last month and a half, and that is always an area of concern.
A reversal of the decreasing. In other words, the rate of decrease has slowed down.
And it's probably going up.
It's going up,
okay.
Especially in the countryside. Well, the difference in this new quarantine classification is that they have allowed tourists from Metro Manila to go to certain destinations, point to point, like Baguio. And even within the NCR plus bubble, people from Metro Manila are allowed to go swimming, for example, in the resorts of Los Baños. How worrisome is that in terms of transmission of the virus?
Well, I mean, if you look at the pattern of the pandemic in the Philippines over the last week, what you're seeing is that you are increasingly seeing spikes and surges in our provinces which had not been exposed to the variants. If you remember, the NCR surge, which we experienced in March and April, were driven by variants. And these variants were contained in the NCR for the most part because the whole area was put into ECQ. The bubble went into ECQ. What you're seeing now all over the Philippines, especially in Mindanao, certain areas in the Visayas, is that regions that had not experienced the surge are now experiencing a delayed surge. Now, this pattern suggests that someone brought the variants from Metro Manila to these regions to set off these outbreaks.
Hi, Professor David, let's go to that, the reversal of the decrease. I know a lot of people were tracking the numbers as they were going down, and then all of a sudden we saw it, tapering off. There was a floor there, and it started climbing back up again. What happened there?
Well, that's the question that we would like to ask. What happened? Well, let us first describe the situation. It's not yet at the point that it is very alarming. Right now, the downward trend in the NCR has disappeared. We are seeing an unstable trend right now, which means that we don't know. We are not certain if it's going to go up or going to go down soon. I mean, we can make projections if the trend is downward, and we can say, well, it's probably going to continue going downward. But right now, it's at the point where it might be going up, or it might be going down, or it might be flat.
It can go either way.
It can go either way. But what we are seeing is that right now there are small increases in some LGUs in the NCR. Not just in the NCR, but also in the NCR bubble, in NCR plus. And some LGUs are still on a downward trend, like Navotas and Malabon. They still have very good numbers, and even Manila, surprisingly. But in some LGUs, it's actually starting to increase, but we don't know if these are isolated events. But what we are seeing, part of the reason is that we're seeing a lot of these super spreader events happening, private pool parties, social gatherings. So a lot of transmissions are actually happening in these social gatherings instead of, maybe in offices. I mean, I would believe that there would still be transmission in public transportation, in malls probably, but right now we're seeing, what we're getting from reports is that we're getting community transmission in these, like I said, these private gatherings. And if this is the case, then this is more of complacency rather than the overall, quarantine restrictions where that's the root cause. From our perspective, we usually wait for at least 1 week before we identify if the trend is clear. And if the trend is clear that we're on an increase, then definitely we're gonna start screaming about it, start waving the flag, because or start coming up on the chiefs more often just to just to tell everybody that okay, it's now really on a reverse. Now, right now we're not
Tighten up, yeah.
right now we're not yet. It is a clear reverse of trend. It could be, but we want to be cautious. We don't want to be prematurely saying something that
Okay.
it could just be a fluctuation in the cases because of the late reporting or some isolated incidents that are not sustainable.